So we come now to Mounce chapter 20, verbal roots and other forms of the future. This is my favorite chapter. This is exciting, but many of my students find chapter 20 to be exceptionally confusing. And so one of the reasons why I like this chapter is because I get to dispel some of the confusion. But there's also something about it that I like, and it's that I think Mounce has done something very helpful in this chapter. And if you can grab a hold of what Mounce is trying to get you to think about, you will be a long way towards understanding something of the Greek verbal system. But in the middle of this brilliant chapter, Mounce does something that I wish he hadn't done. And so I'm going to tweak Mounce when we get to that part. Okay? And hopefully by tweaking Mounce, things will become a lot clearer. So let's get started here. At the beginning of this chapter in Mounce, he wants to make sure that you understand the difference between roots and stems. What is a verb's root versus what a verb's stem is. So on your handout, you have the opportunity to write this down. What is a verbal root? A root is a verb's most basic form, period. Every verb can be traced back to some root idea, some root. So luo, the verb for I loose, has as its root the part lu. Now, do you notice the asterisk right before that? That asterisk is used by linguists to refer to the theoretical root of a word. So lu, ballo, I throw or cast. Its root is ball, beta, alpha, lambda. Now, one thing that perhaps you might see from this is the fact that a verb's root may not necessarily be the same as the tense stem you use for a particular tense. And that brings us to the second item, the difference between root and stem. What is a stem? A stem is a verb's basic form in a particular tense. A verb stem is its basic form in a particular tense. So we will talk about things like present tense stems and future tense stems and aorist tense stems. But we wouldn't talk so much about present roots and aorist roots. Okay? So let's take a look here at our verbs luo and ballo. What I've given you is on the top line, the top row, the present active indicative of these verbs, luo and ballo. And on the second line, the future active indicative, luso and ballo. So what I want to ask is, what is the present stem of luo and ballo? Remember how we determined a tense's stem? What do? What do we strip off? You strip off personal endings and connecting vowels, and if there are any tense formatives, you strip those away as well. So, once we strip off the personal endings and connecting vowels for these forms, what are we left with? Well, we're left with lu over here and ball with the double lambda over here, right? So, lu is the present stem, and ball is the present stem of ballo. Okay? So present stem for both of these. Now over here I have luso and ballo. Both of these are future. How do I figure out the future tense stem? Strip off personal endings, connecting vowels, and tense formatives. What am I left with? I'm left with lu for my future stem, right? And here, it's ball with one lambda. That's my future stem of ballo. Now, what do you see here? Sometimes the present stem of a verb is identical to its future stem, right? Sometimes the present stem of a verb is not the same as its future stem, as in ballo. Double lambda ball, present stem, single lambda ball, future stem. Okay, so sometimes they're the same, sometimes they're different. Now look at the next section. Here's the thing where Mounce makes money on this book. This is what makes the book to me worth its money. Mounce is convinced that you will be helped along, and he's right, by getting this concept down. The different tense stems that you see are derived from verbal roots. Okay, this is the money idea of the chapter. The different tense stems are formed from the verbal root and not. Underline, highlight, put some bling around it, very important, and not from the present tense stem. Let's take a look at some examples here, okay? Verbal roots, you see, then are used to form these different stems. Let's use luo as our example. So I've got the root lu here. The present stem is lu, as seen in the verb luo. The future stem is lu, as seen in the future verb luso. You don't quite know this yet, but I'll use it as an example. The aorist stem, which aorist is one of the past tense stems in Greek, the aorist stem is lu, and we see that in the form elusa, which means he loosed. So luo, I loose, luso, I shall loose, elusa, I loosed. Okay? You can see the stems in each of those forms, can't you? Now, where a lot of students get mixed up is they say, okay, when I learn a new verb, which form am I learning as my vocabulary word? Your lexical form. Present. It's always the present, active, indicative, first singular, right? And then when they get to the future chapter, they learn the future form, and the stem looks the same. And they get to the aorist, and they learn the past tense forms of a verb, and their stem looks the same as the present, and so they make the wrong assumption that the future stem is derived from the present stem that they learned when they learned the vocab word. And they think that the aorist stem is derived from the present stem, which they learned as their vocab word. But the reality is that these other stems here are not derived from the present stem. Rather, all the stems are derived from a root. So the present stem takes its stem from lu, and it happens to be the same as the root. The future stem of luso, lu, happens to be derived from the root without any changes. It happens to be identical. And the aorist stem lu is also derived exactly from the root lu. Each of them together are deriving their stems from the same root. Now, take a look at this next example. We have the root for ball. Ball means to cast or throw, okay? And let's jot down the stems. The present stem of to throw or cast is ball with a double lambda, as seen in the verb form ballo. And that's the lexical form, isn't it? You guys have learned that. The future stem is ball with a single lambda, and the future active indicative is ballo. Now we're going to talk about why there's no sigma here in the future, but don't worry your pretty little heads about that right now. Just realize that the future stem that you're seeing is ball with a single lambda. The present stem is ball with a double lambda. And then the aorist stem for Past tense is ball with a single lambda as seen in the form ebalon, I threw or cast. All right? Now, if you learned ballo, the lexical form, has two lambdas, and you're thinking, well, when I get to the future tense stem will be derived from the present stem, and then you find out that the future tense stem is not exactly the same as the present stem, you're going to be saying, the future stem has tweaked the present stem. And you would be wrong. And you get to the aorist stem, and you go, oh my goodness, why has the aorist stem changed the present stem to form the aorist stem? And you would be wrong to think that, because the reality here is not that the future is derived from the present, and not that the aorist is derived from the present, but rather all of them are derived from the root ball. In fact, the future and the aorist stems are simply identical to the root. And it's the present stem that has tweaked the root slightly to form its stem. A lot of students, when they learn the present stem and see that the future and the aorist are different, think that the future and the aorist are irregular. But guess what? They're not the irregular forms. Rather, it's the present stem that is frequently the one that is irregular compared to the other two. All right? And if you can just really get fixed in your mind that all the stems are derived from roots and you see them in relation to the roots, you'll be able to understand what's going on a lot better. Okay? So this is so important. That present stem is frequently the one that is modified to form it from the root. Okay? It's the most irregular of the tense stems. Question: how do you find the root? When Mounce gives you a vocabulary word, he is going to put the root in parentheses with the asterisk on the left side of it. So look at that root, and I really encourage you, when you learn your new vocabulary word, look and see what is the root. And then look at the present tense form and ask yourself, has the present tense form preserved the root exactly? Or has the present tense form modified the root in some way? All right? We're going to walk through these sorts of patterns of how stems relate to roots next. This is where I think Mounce is helpful, except for one thing. How many patterns in the chapter does Mounce give you, beginning on page 170? Well, you see pattern 1, pattern 2, pattern 3, and pattern 4. Okay? He makes it look like there are 4 patterns that verbs follow. Guess what? There are not 4 patterns. There are only 3. What he calls pattern 3, liquid futures, that is not a pattern at all. So if I were writing this textbook, and maybe someday I'll write one and make millions of dollars, probably not, but if I were writing this textbook and I were in Mounce's shoes, I would have just called pattern 1, pattern 2, and then what he calls pattern 4, that really would be pattern 3. Okay? And so I'm going to present it sort of that way, and then when we get to pattern 3, which I'll do last, I'll show you why it's not a real pattern. Okay? So just bear with me. All right. So let's talk about the patterns for how the present stem and even the future stems are related to the verbal roots. Okay? Pattern number 1 are situations where the root has not been modified to form the tense stem. And in particular, we're interested in the present tense stem. Okay? So look at our examples up here that I'll write down. Let's take the verb akuo. What's that mean? I hear. Which form is this? This is the present, isn't it? This is the present. And let me jot down ku, so, right here. Look at that. Which form is that? That's the future, right? All right, very good. So I'm going to put present and future here. So what is the present stem? Looking at the form. It's a ku, right? What is the root of a kuo? It's a ku, exactly. So I'm going to underline the present stem. The present stem is a ku here, right? So notice that the present stem has been derived from the root without any modification at all, right? It's just the same as the root. And then my future stem, likewise, is a ku, right? I strip off the connecting vowels, tense formatives, and personal endings, and I've got my future stem. And it also happens to be unmodified from the root. So this is a very, very happy situation, isn't it? When my future tense stem and my present tense stem are both the same as each other, and they're both the same as the root. This makes it really easy to know all the tense forms of the verb. Okay? So you know how we talked about how there's 6 principal parts? There's a good number of verbs where all 6 of the principal parts are the same. They're all derived from the root in exactly the same way. He gives you another verb form, and we'll go ahead and just jot it down. So, blepo, what does that mean? I see. I see. And what is the root that blepo is derived from? It's blep. Okay? So notice that the present stem is identical to the root. No changes have been made to the root to form the present stem. Isn't that great? It's lovely, isn't it? All right. Very good. If I wanted to form the future, it would be, what happens here? Blep plus so. Can I just leave that like that? Blepso? Now, what does P sigma do? They become apc. This is from the square of stops phenomena that we've already learned, right? So, blepso. Now, that's the future active indicative, but when I strip off the connecting vowels, tense formatives, and personal endings, what am I left with? I'm left with blep is the future stem as well, isn't it? But it's, you can't really see it. It's kind of half of that, right? It's the P and the sigma is part of the tense formative. So blep, this is also derived from the root without any modification. And when I say it's derived without any modification, what I mean is the root has been used for the future. Once I add the tense formatives to it, then I get these funky changes, right? But the stem I'm using is the root before the phonetic changes happen with adding the stem. I mean, with adding the tense formatives. Okay? Now, let's take a look at pattern number 2. This is where it gets sort of interesting. In pattern 2, we have different root. What does that mean? It means that the present stem and the future stem and maybe some of the other tense stems are not derived from the same root without modification, but are derived perhaps from different roots. Example? Well, let me give you an English example here. The verb to go in the present tense is go. I go, you go, he, she, or it goes. Okay? How do I change it to the past tense? Do I say I goed, you goed? No, it's went. Now, if I asked you to figure out how went was derived from go, could you? No. And the reason you couldn't is because they have absolutely no similarities of sound or consonants at all. And the reason for that is they're not derived from the same root. I go comes from the root go, But I went comes from a completely different root. It comes from the verb to wend. Okay? Sort of like to bend. What's the past tense of bend? I bend. Okay? So to wend, I wend is present. We don't use it in English anymore. Past, I went. Okay? So in the different tenses of go, we have one root being used for the present and a completely different root being used for the past. This is called suppletion. And the form that is a form characterized by suppletion is called a suppletive form. Okay, or a suppletive verb form. So just if you are ever on Jeopardy, this might come in handy. You know, say, I'll take ancient Greek verbal roots, Alex, for 200. And to make sure you've got suppletion in your vocabulary. Now, let's talk now about some actual Greek examples of this. You've learned the verb erchomai. I go, right? I go. That's the present middle indicative for singular. The future form of erchomai is elusomai. If you take your textbook and go to the vocabulary here, let's see, actually it's under the previous words. This is on page 179. You'll see erchomai. See that? It's the first word under previous words. What does Mounce tell you the root of erchomai is? Yes, so the root of erchomai's form is erch. Everybody see that? What is the root, the real verbal root of elusomai? I will go. Yes, it's eluth. Now, if you're looking at the future and you're scratching your head saying, how in the world did the future form, elus, how in the world did that come out of erchomai? The answer is, it didn't, right? It's not derived from the present stem. Rather, the present stem is derived from one root, and the future stem is derived from a completely different root. Okay, they're not derived from each other. That's the important thing here to get. So you see that? All right. Now you may be wondering, how in the world does elusomai even come from the future stem eluth? Shall we walk through that real quickly? This will be fun. Okay. So basically, the root eluth is used for the future stem. So it's eluth. And then I add what for the future? I add a sigma tense formative. And this is a middle only future. So I'm going to add my connecting vowel and my first person singular middle ending. Elusomai. Now you know, don't you, what happens to dentals before sigma? They drop out. And when that theta drops out, I'm left with elusomai. Okay? So it really is eluth, but the theta had to fall out because it's a dental before a sigma. Well, they both mean go, but it's a different root than erch. Okay, so here we have completely different roots. All right, let's take a look at lego and ero. Erchomai and elusomai have to do with going. Okay, so we'll just say to go. Lego and ero, what's lego mean? To say. Okay, so this verb has to do with saying. So this is the present, lego. This is the future, ero. I say, I will say. Now, can you tell me how came from leg? Nope, because it doesn't come from leg, does it? What is the real root of lego? Leg. Excellent. What's the real root of ero? Air. Okay, so they just happen to be derived from two completely separate roots. But this is the future's root used for the future stem. Okay? Just like we switched to a different form for our past.
There's not a present version of
Yeah, no, you won't have a present form of a row. Yeah, yeah. It's possible that the root from which this is derived at an earlier stage of Greek might have had at some point a present use. I'd have to go back and look. I've never actually tried to chase that down. But yeah, this is a matter of suppletion where a different root is brought in, borrowed as it were, for the future tense. Okay, and then we have horao, which is a contract verb. So the real present active indicative is horo, I see, and the future of horao is opsamai, opsamai. So what is the root of horao? And this is in your vocab list. Yeah, you see that here? So, hora, I'll just leave the rough breathing off for now. And then for opsamai, it's opt. Like you've heard of optics. Okay, visual things. Okay, so look, hora, opt. Completely unrelated roots, aren't they? So the present stem is derived from this root. The future stem is derived from a completely different root. Now, how did opsamai come out of opt? Let's just show you what happened here. It would have been opt plus a sigma, omicron, mai, right? So, what kind of a letter is tau? Is it labial, velar, or dental? It's dental. Dental's before sigma. Drop out. Remember the teeth, dentals, fall out. That leaves me with a P before a sigma. And what do P and sigma do? They combine to form a C. So you see where opsamai comes from? Okay. This is easy when you work backwards, isn't it? Yeah. Okay. So those are the forms there.